The whispers followed Viola Kingston everywhere she went in Shoshone City, Wyoming Territory, 1876. Too wild, they said. Too stubborn, they claimed. Too damaged, they whispered behind gloved hands and painted fans. At 26, the townsfolk had long decided her fate, a spinster schoolteacher whose only companions would be chalk dust and other people's children. But Viola had stopped listening to their predictions years ago. On the same day, she'd stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted. The summer sun beat down on Viola's back as she balanced on the rickety ladder outside the schoolhouse, hammer in hand. The roof had been leaking for months, and with the school board refusing to spare funds for repairs, she'd decided to fix it herself. Her dark hair was gathered in a practical bun, several rebellious strands escaping to frame her face as she worked. "Miss Kingston," Sheriff Miller's voice startled her, nearly sending her tumbling from the ladder. "What in tarnation do you think you're doing up there?" Viola steadied herself, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve. "What does it look like, Sheriff? I'm fixing the roof before the next rainstorm ruins more of my books." The sheriff shook his head. "That's men's work, Miss Kingston. It ain't proper." "Neither is teaching children under a leaky roof," she replied calmly, driving another nail into the shingle. "Unless you'd like to do it for me," the sheriff huffed, adjusting his hat. "I've got actual law keeping to attend to, and you've got the whole town talking again. Mrs. Peterson was just saying at the general store that it's no wonder no man will have you, climbing around on rooftops like some kind of circus performer." Viola smiled tightly. "How fortunate that I've never aspired to be Mrs. Peterson's idea of a proper lady." She turned back to her work, effectively dismissing him. It wasn't that Viola didn't want love, she'd simply stopped expecting it. After her parents died in a wagon accident when she was 18, leaving her to raise her younger brother, Timothy, she'd learned quickly that survival required practicality over romance. By the time Timothy had grown and moved west to California 3 years ago, the town had already decided her fate. As she hammered the last nail, a commotion from the main street caught her attention. The stagecoach wasn't due until tomorrow, but she could hear the distant rumble of wheels and the clatter of hooves. Curious, she climbed down the ladder and shaded her eyes against the sun. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of a group of riders, led by a man on a tall black stallion. The newcomers moved with purpose, their horses trotting steadily down the main street. Viola watched with mild interest. Shoshone City occasionally saw drifters and cowboys passing through, but something about this group seemed different. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders set in a confident line. Even from a distance, she could see he wore no badge, but the townsfolk parted for him as if he commanded respect through presence alone. She turned away, reminding herself that strangers in town were none of her concern. The schoolhouse wouldn't repair itself, and she still had the broken window to fix before she could start preparing for the new term. "Need some help with that ladder, madam." The deep voice came from directly behind her. Viola spun around to find herself face to face with the leader of the riders. Up close, he was even more imposing, well over 6 feet tall, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and a shadow of stubble lined his jaw. "I can manage," she replied, lifting her chin. "But thank you for the offer, Mr. Hawkins," he supplied with a slight nod. "Dawson Hawkins." "Miss Viola Kingston," she returned. "Welcome to Shoshone City, Mr. Hawkins, though if you're looking for entertainment, I'm afraid you've arrived in the wrong town." A smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "Just passing through, madam. My men and I are driving a herd to Fort Laramie. Thought we'd stop for supplies." "Well, Mr. Hawkins, you'll find the general store that way," she gestured down the street. "Good day to you." But instead of leaving, Dawson Hawkins reached for the ladder. "This isn't stable," he commented, testing its wobble. "Mind if I steady it for you while you finish up?" "I've already finished," Viola said, though she hadn't yet tackled the broken window. "Then perhaps I could help with whatever's next." He nodded toward the shattered glass. "That window looks like it needs attention." Viola studied him, trying to understand his persistence. Men in Shoshone City generally kept their distance from her after their first rebuff. "Why would you want to do that, Mr. Hawkins? Surely you have cattle to attend to." "My foreman can handle the herd for a spell," he said easily. "And it seems to me that helping a lady with repairs is simply the decent thing to do." "I'm not," she stopped herself. She'd been about to say she wasn't a lady who needed help, but that wasn't entirely true. The window was higher than she could comfortably reach, even with the ladder. "Very well. If you're determined to be of service, I won't stop you." For the next hour, Dawson worked on the window while Viola measured and cut the replacement glass she'd ordered weeks ago. She found herself watching him more than she should, noting the sure, efficient way he moved and the respectful manner in which he addressed her. "How long have you been teaching?" he asked as he carefully removed the broken glass. 8 years, she replied, "since I was 18. "That's impressive." "It wasn't a choice initially," Viola admitted, surprising herself with her candor. "My parents died and I had a younger brother to support. Teaching was the only respectable profession available to me." Dawson nodded, not offering empty condolences. "And now?" "Now I find I'm rather good at it," she said with a small smile. "The children of Shoshone City deserve an education, regardless of whether their teacher fits the town's idea of propriety." "And what would that idea be?" he asked, fitting the new glass into place. Viola handed him the putty she'd prepared. "Oh, you know, quiet, demure, content to let men make all the decisions, desperate to be married before she's considered past her prime." "Which you clearly are not," Dawson observed. "Desperate to be married. No, I certainly am not." "Past your prime," he clarified, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her look away. "The town would disagree with you, Mr. Hawkins." "Call me Dawson," he said, "and I've rarely concerned myself with what towns think." When the window was finished, Viola expected him to leave, but instead he offered to help her organize the schoolbooks that had been damaged in the last rainfall. She should have refused, but there was something about his quiet presence that she found surprisingly comfortable. "You read Thoreau?" he asked, noticing one of her personal books mixed in with the school texts. "You know Thoreau," she countered. Unable to keep the surprise from her voice, Dawson smiled, a full smile this time that transformed his face. "I may be a cowboy, Miss Kingston, but I wasn't born in a saddle. My father was a professor before he caught gold fever and dragged us west." "And yet you chose cattle over books," she observed. "I chose the open country," he corrected, "but I never left the books behind." He tapped the cover of Walden. "The essential facts of life, seen with clear eyes, that's as necessary on the trail as it is in a classroom." By the time they finished, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the schoolhouse floor. Viola realized with a start that she'd spent the entire afternoon in the company of a stranger and had enjoyed it more than she cared to admit. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Hawkins Dawson," she said, walking with him to the door. "Your cattle must be wondering where you've disappeared to." "They're in good hands," he assured her. "And the pleasure was mine, Viola." He said her name as if testing its sound, and something fluttered in her chest at the way it rolled off his tongue. "How long will you be in Shoshone City?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "A few days, perhaps. We need to rest the herd before the last push to Fort Laramie." He settled his hat on his head. "Would it be presumptuous to call on you again tomorrow?" "Yes," she said honestly, "but I find I don't mind presumption as much as I once did. Good evening, Dawson." His smile stayed with her long after he'd gone, a warmth in her memory that refused to fade even as she prepared for bed in her small house at the edge of town. She told herself it was merely the novelty of intelligent conversation, nothing more. Dawson Hawkins would move on with his herd, and Shoshone City would continue exactly as it had been. But for the first time in years, Viola Kingston fell asleep thinking of possibilities rather than certainties. The next morning, Viola woke to the sound of someone at her door. Frowning, she pulled on her robe and peered through the curtains to see Mrs. Abernathy, the mayor's wife and self-appointed guardian of the town's moral standards, standing on her porch with a pinched expression. Viola sighed and opened the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Abernathy." "What brings you here so early?" "I think you know very well, Miss Kingston," the older woman said, her thin lips pressed together. The entire town is talking about you entertaining that cowboy at the schoolhouse yesterday, for hours, unchaperoned. I was repairing the school, Mrs. Abernathy. Mr. Hawkins kindly offered his assistance. Is that what they're calling it these days? Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. A respectable woman would have declined such an offer. Your reputation is already beyond salvaging, according to town gossip, Viola interrupted smoothly. So I fail to see what difference Mr. Hawkins's assistance makes. Mrs. Abernathy drew herself up. The school board has entrusted our children's education to you, Miss Kingston. We expect certain standards to be upheld. Standards like a roof that doesn't leak and windows that keep out the wind, Viola replied, which I have now provided thanks to Mr. Hawkins's help. The board will be discussing this at our next meeting, Mrs. Abernathy threatened. I look forward to it. Perhaps they'll finally approve the funds for those repairs I've been requesting for months. Viola smiled pleasantly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for the day. She closed the door firmly, leaning against it as she heard Mrs. Abernathy's indignant footsteps retreating down the path. This was precisely why Viola had stopped concerning herself with the town's opinion. No matter what she did, it would never be enough. After dressing in her simple blue calico dress, Viola headed to the general store for supplies. She was acutely aware of the whispers that followed her, the conversations that halted when she approached only to resume more fervently when she passed. "Morning, Miss Kingston," Mr. Peterson greeted her from behind the counter. "What can I get for you today?" "I need chalk, paper, and some more lamp oil, please," she replied, ignoring the pointed stare from Mrs. Peterson, who was arranging fabric bolts nearby. "Heard you had some help with the schoolhouse yesterday," Mr. Peterson commented as he gathered her items. "That cowboy staying long." "I wouldn't know," Viola said evenly. "He was simply being neighborly." Mrs. Peterson couldn't contain herself. "Neighborly? A drifter with no connections to decent society? Really, Viola, at your age, you should know better than to encourage such attention." "Not that it matters. I suppose everyone knows no respectable man would—" "That'll be 85 cents, Mr. Peterson interrupted, shooting his wife a warning look. Viola counted out the coins, her face carefully blank. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson." As she turned to leave, the store's door opened and Dawson Hawkins stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. The store fell silent, all eyes darting between him and Viola. "Miss Kingston," he greeted her with a nod. "Good morning, Mr. Hawkins." She inclined her head slightly, aware of the audience drinking in their every word. "I was hoping I might find you here," he said. "I wanted to ask if you'd do me the honor of joining me for dinner this evening at the hotel restaurant." A collective gasp seemed to rise from the store's patrons. Viola could practically hear Mrs. Peterson's scandalized thoughts. "That's very kind," Viola replied carefully, "but I'm afraid I must decline. The schoolhouse still requires my attention." Something flickered in Dawson's eyes, disappointment, perhaps. "I understand. Perhaps another time then." "Perhaps," she agreed. Though they both knew she was merely being polite, Dawson stepped aside to let her pass. But as she reached the door, he spoke again. "The window glass should hold through winter, but that roof will need more substantial repairs before the snow comes." "I'd be happy to take a look at it again if you'd allow it." Viola paused, turning back to face him. Behind Dawson, she could see Mrs. Peterson's outraged expression and Mr. Peterson's barely concealed amusement. "Thank you for your concern," she said finally. "I'll consider it." Outside, Viola took a deep breath of the fresh summer air. The nerve of the man, to ask her to dinner in front of half the town, knowing full well what it would do to the gossip mill. And yet, a small part of her apart she thought long dormant had wanted to accept his invitation. She was so lost in thought that she almost collided with Timothy Brewster, a former student of hers who now worked at the telegraph office. "Miss Kingston, I was just coming to find you," he said excitedly. "A telegram came for you this morning, from your brother in California." Viola's heart skipped a beat. Timothy rarely telegraphed unless it was important. "Is everything all right?" "Seems to be," Timothy Brewster assured her, handing over the telegram. "He paid for a reply, so you can come by the office when you're ready." Viola thanked him and unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Viola stop married last month to wonderful girl stop expecting child by winter stop come visit. When school term ends stop miss you sister stop Timothy tears pricked at her eyes. Her little brother, married and about to become a father. Joy for him mingled with a sudden, sharp awareness of her own solitude. She folded the telegram carefully and slipped it into her pocket, blinking back the unexpected emotion. When she looked up, Dawson Hawkins was standing a few yards away, watching her with concern. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. "No," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Good news, actually. My brother is married and expecting a child." "That's wonderful," Dawson said with genuine warmth. "You must be very happy for him." "I am," she assured him. "Very happy." Dawson studied her for a moment. "Would you walk with me, Miss Kingston, just to the end of the street and back? I promise to return you to proper society unscathed." A laugh escaped her at his wry tone. "I'm afraid that ship has sailed, Mr. Hawkins, but yes, I will walk with you." They strolled in comfortable silence for a moment before Dawson spoke again. "I apologize if I embarrassed you in the store. It wasn't my intention." "Wasn't it?" She glanced sideways at him. "You seem like a man who knows exactly what he's doing." "Usually," he admitted, "but you've caught me off guard, Viola Kingston." "How so?" "I came to Shoshone City expecting nothing more than a brief stop for supplies. Instead, I find myself lingering, hoping for a few more moments of conversation with a schoolteacher who climbs ladders and quotes Thoreau." Viola felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Hawkins, Dawson," he corrected gently. "Dawson," she conceded. "You'll be moving on soon. And I will remain here, teaching children who will eventually grow up to look at me with the same pitying glances their parents do now." "Is that what you want, to stay here forever?" The question caught her by surprise. "What I want has rarely factored into my decisions." "Maybe it's time it did," he suggested. They had reached the end of the street and Viola turned to face him. "Why are you doing this? There must be plenty of young, unmarried women in the towns you pass through, women without reputations for being difficult and unmarriageable." Dawson's expression grew serious. "I've never put much stock in what others think makes a good match. I prefer to trust my own judgment." "And what does your judgment tell you about me?" she challenged. "That you're brave, intelligent, and fiercely independent," he said without hesitation. "That you care more about doing what's right than what's expected. That you deserve better than this town's narrow vision of your worth." His words left her speechless. For years, she'd built walls around herself, accepting the town's judgment as inevitable if not accurate. No one had ever seen through those walls so clearly. "I need to go," she said finally. "Thank you for the walk." "Will you reconsider dinner?" he asked as she turned to leave. "Not at the hotel if that concerns you. I make a decent stew over a campfire, and the view of the sunset from our camp is spectacular." Viola hesitated. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to refuse, to retreat to the safety of her solitary existence. But the telegram in her pocket reminded her that life moved forward with or without her permission. "I finish at the schoolhouse at 5, she said at last. "You may collect me there if you wish." The smile that transformed his face made her heart beat faster. "Until 5, then." As Viola watched him walk away, she wondered if she had just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward something extraordinary. The afternoon crawled by as Viola sorted through old textbooks and prepared lesson plans for the upcoming term. Her mind kept drifting to Dawson, and each time she had to firmly pull her thoughts back to the task at hand. It was ridiculous to be so distracted by a man she barely knew, a man who would be gone from Shoshone City within days. At precisely 5 o'clock, a knock sounded at the schoolhouse door. Viola smoothed her skirts, checked her hair in the small mirror she kept in her desk drawer, and took a steadying breath before opening the door. Dawson stood on the steps, hat in hand. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was clean, his hair neatly combed, and she caught the faint scent of soap. "Miss Kingston," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look lovely." "Thank you." She gestured to the stack of books on her desk. "I just need to finish putting these away." "Allow me," he offered, stepping inside and lifting the heavy pile with ease. "Where do they belong?" They worked together in companionable silence, shelving books and straightening desks. When they finished, Dawson offered his arm. My horse is just outside. The camp isn't far, but it's an easier ride than walk. Viola hesitated. Riding with him would mean sitting close, perhaps even with his arm around her waist to steady her. The propriety she usually dismissed suddenly seemed very important. Dawson seemed to sense her concern. I can bring the wagon instead if you'd prefer. It would take a little longer. No, she decided. Your horse will be fine. Outside, the magnificent black stallion greeted them with a soft nickering. Viola approached cautiously, holding out her hand for the horse to sniff. His name is Dante, Dawson told her. Don't let his size fool you, he's gentle as a lamb. He's beautiful, Viola murmured, stroking the horse's velvety nose. Thoroughbred. Part thoroughbred, part Mustang, Dawson confirmed, looking pleased at her knowledge. He's got speed and endurance both. He cupped his hands to give her a boost up, and Viola settled sideways on the saddle, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. Dawson swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his chest warm against her back as he reached around her for the reins. Comfortable? He asked, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. Yes, she replied, though comfortable wasn't exactly the right word for the fluttering sensation in her stomach. They rode out of town, Viola acutely aware of every pair of eyes watching from windows and porches. By tomorrow, the gossip would have her halfway to ruin, but surprisingly she found herself caring less than she expected. Dawson's cattle camp was set up in a meadow about 2 miles outside town, near a gentle creek. A dozen cowboys were scattered around several campfires, some playing cards, others mending tack or simply resting after a day's work. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, watched over by a few riders. The men looked up with interest as Dawson rode in with Viola, but to her surprise, there were no crude jokes or suggestive comments, only respectful nods and polite greetings of "Madam," as Dawson helped her dismount. "Miss Kingston, this is my foreman, Jacob Wells," Dawson said, introducing a weathered man with kind eyes. "Jake, Miss Viola Kingston, Shoshone City's schoolteacher." "Madam," Jake tipped his hat. "Boss mentioned you helped fix up the schoolhouse, mighty impressive." "Mr. Hawkins did most of the work," Viola demurred. Jake chuckled. "That ain't how he told it." He turned to Dawson. "Cook's got stew ready whenever you are, boss." "Thank you, Jake." Dawson guided Viola toward a campfire set slightly apart from the others, where an older man was tending a large pot. "Miss Kingston, our cook, Mr. Samuel Johnson, best trail cook west of the Mississippi." The cook grinned, revealing a gap where his front tooth should be. "Don't you believe his flattery, miss. He just says that 'cause I'm the only one who will put up with his nonsense." He handed her a tin plate heaped with stew. "Hope you like it hearty, madam." The stew was delicious chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth flavored with herbs. Viola hadn't realized how hungry she was until she'd cleared her plate and accepted a second helping. "You have quite an operation," she commented as Dawson poured her a cup of coffee. "How many cattle are you driving?" "About 2,000 head," he replied. "Not the largest herd, but healthy stock. We're delivering them to the Army at Fort Laramie." "Is that what you do, supply the Army?" Dawson nodded. "Among other things, I have a ranch north of here near the Montana border. Started with just 100 acres and 50 head of cattle 7 years ago. And now," a smile tugged at his lips, "a bit more than that." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the meadow, Dawson suggested they walk along the creek. He carried a blanket under his arm, which he spread on a grassy bank with a view of the sunset. The gesture was so thoughtful that Viola felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name, a longing for simple kindnesses she'd denied herself for too long. They sat side by side, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. In the distance, a cowboy played a harmonica, the sweet, melancholy notes floating on the evening air. "It's beautiful," Viola said softly. "I forget sometimes, living in town, how vast the sky is." "That's what I love about the open country," Dawson replied. "The endless sky, the feeling that you're seeing things as they truly are without all the clutter of town life." "Is that why you became a rancher instead of following your father's path?" Dawson considered this. "Partly. But mostly it was because I wanted to build something of my own, something real and lasting." He glanced at her. What about you? Did you always want to be a teacher? No, she admitted. I wanted to travel to see the world beyond Wyoming Territory, maybe even become a writer. She smiled ruefully. Childish dreams. Why childish? People do travel, people do write. Women with responsibilities don't, she said simply. After my parents died, Timothy needed stability, not a sister chasing fantasies. And now, Dawson asked, Timothy has grown with a family of his own. What's keeping you in Shoshone City? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Viola had asked herself the same thing countless times since Timothy left for California. The truth was, inertia had become its own reason. It was easier to stay than to leave, easier to accept limitations than to challenge them. I don't know, she confessed. Habit, perhaps, or fear. What are you afraid of? Dawson's voice was gentle, with no trace of judgment. Failing, she said after a moment. Discovering that the town is right about me after all, that I'm not meant for marriage or family or any kind of conventional happiness. Dawson was quiet for so long that Viola wondered if she'd said too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. Viola, may I tell you something about myself that few people know? She nodded, curious. When I started my ranch, everyone said I would fail. I was too young, too educated, too stubborn. The first winter, I nearly proved them right, lost a quarter of my herd in a blizzard, almost froze to death myself. His eyes were distant with memory. I could have given up then, sold what was left and taken a safe job in some town. But you didn't, Viola said. No, he agreed. Because I realized something important. Their predictions about my failure weren't actually about me at all. They were about their own fears and limitations. The parallel to her situation wasn't lost on Viola. And you think the town's judgment of me is the same. I know it is, he said with quiet certainty. You're not unmarriageable, Viola. You're just waiting for someone who sees you clearly. His gaze held hers, and Viola felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. It would be so easy to lean toward him, to let herself believe that he could be that person. Instead, she looked away. It's getting late. I should return to town. If Dawson was disappointed, he didn't show it. He helped her to her feet and folded the blanket. Of course. The ride back to town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the schoolhouse, Dawson dismounted and lifted Viola down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for coming, he said. Would you allow me to call on you tomorrow? Viola knew she should refuse. Each meeting with him only made the inevitable parting more difficult, but looking up into his face, illuminated by the soft moonlight, she couldn't bring herself to say no. Yes, she said simply. Good night then, Miss Kingston. He took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then mounted Dante and rode away. Viola stood watching until he disappeared into the darkness, her hand still tingling from his kiss, wondering what exactly she had gotten herself into. The next week passed in a blur of quiet moments and growing intimacy. True to his word, Dawson called on Viola every day, sometimes helping her with repairs at the schoolhouse, other times taking her for rides in the countryside. They talked for hours about books, philosophy, and their dreams, finding in each other a kindred spirit neither had expected to discover. The town's gossip machine worked overtime, but for once, Viola found she truly didn't care. There was a freedom in being with Dawson that she had never experienced before, a sense that she was finally being seen for who she really was, rather than who others expected her to be. On Sunday, he even escorted her to church, causing Mrs. Abernathy nearly to faint when they walked in together and took a seat in Viola's usual pew. Reverend Thomas, to his credit, merely smiled and continued with the service as if nothing unusual had happened. After church, Dawson invited Viola to dine with him at the hotel restaurant publicly, properly, with no room for misinterpretation of his intentions. She accepted, ignoring the whispers that followed them down the street. You realize what you're doing, she said quietly as they walked. Associating yourself with me so openly. I do, he confirmed. I'm letting Shoshone City know that I hold you in the highest regard. The simplicity of his statement touched her deeply. No man had ever stood beside her so publicly, so proudly, without concern for what others might think. At the restaurant, Dawson pulled out her chair and ordered the finest meal on the menu. They spoke of his ranch, the sturdy house he had built with his own hands, the stands of pine trees that sheltered it from winter winds, the wild horses he sometimes tamed and added to his stock. "It sounds wonderful," Viola said, trying to imagine the life he described. "Lonely, though, isn't it?" A shadow crossed his face. "At times, I have good men working for me, but it's not the same as having a family." "No family at all?" she asked carefully. "My parents are both gone," he said. "My father never recovered from the gold fever, even after it became clear there was no fortune to be found. My mother followed him from camp to camp until consumption took her." He twisted his water glass slowly. "I have a sister in Boston, married to a banker. We write, but I haven't seen her in years." "I'm sorry," Viola said softly. "I know how hard it is to lose parents." Dawson nodded, his eyes meeting hers with understanding born of shared experience. "It changes you, makes you realize that life doesn't always follow the path you expect." As they finished their meal, Viola became aware that the restaurant had gradually emptied until they were the only patrons remaining. The waiter hovered discreetly, clearly waiting for them to leave so he could close up. "We should go," she said, reluctant to end their time together. "I think we're keeping them from closing." Outside, the evening was cool with a breeze that hinted at the coming autumn. Dawson offered Viola his arm and they walked slowly toward her house, neither in any hurry to reach their destination. "When do you leave for Fort Laramie?" Viola asked, voicing the question she had been avoiding for days. "Soon," Dawson admitted. "The cattle are rested and we need to deliver them before the first snow." The inevitable parting that had been lurking at the edges of their time together suddenly felt immediate and painful. Viola stopped walking, turning to face him in the moonlight. "What are we doing, Dawson?" she asked quietly. "You'll be gone in days, and I'll be right back where I started, the unmarriageable schoolteacher of Shoshone City." Dawson took her hands in his. "You could come with me." The words hung in the night air between them, impossible and intoxicating. "To Fort Laramie?" she asked, bewildered. "To my ranch," he clarified. "As my wife." Viola stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Your wife, Dawson, we've known each other barely a week. And in that week, I've learned more about you than most men learn about their wives in years," he said earnestly. "I know that you're brave and intelligent. I know that you face life's challenges head-on instead of shrinking from them. I know that you can quote Thoreau and fix a roof and make me laugh like no one ever has. But marriage," Viola shook her head, overwhelmed. "It's too sudden." "Is it?" Dawson stepped closer. "Viola, I've spent 7 years building a ranch, turning wilderness into something beautiful and productive. I've faced blizzards and drought and cattle thieves and never once doubted my path. But something was missing, and I didn't even realize what it was until I met you." "You can't possibly know that I'm what's missing in your life," she protested. "We're practically strangers. We're kindred spirits," he countered. "Two people who see the world the same way, who value the same things, who fit together as if we were made for each other." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Think about it. Talk to me. Ask me anything you want to know." Viola's mind was spinning. "I would have to leave everything, my position, my home." "Yes," he acknowledged. "It would be a new beginning for both of us." "What if," she hesitated, voicing her deepest fear, "what if it doesn't work? What if you realize the town was right about me all along?" Dawson's expression softened. "Viola, the town is wrong about you. They've always been wrong, and if you need time to believe that, I'll give you time. I'll come back for you after I deliver the herd if that's what you want." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache with longing and fear in equal measure. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is all happening so fast." "Of course." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Take all the time you need." They walked the rest of the way to her house in silence, both lost in thought. At her door, Dawson took her face in his hands and kissed her, not on the hand this time, but on the lips, a kiss so tender and reverent that Viola felt tears spring to her eyes. "Good night, Viola," he whispered, touching his forehead to hers for a brief moment before stepping back. "Good night, Dawson," she replied, her voice barely audible. Inside her small house, Viola moved as if in a dream, lighting the lamp and sinking into a chair, her fingers pressed to her lips where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss. Marriage. He wanted to marry her. To take her away from Shoshone City to a ranch she had never seen, to start a new life with a man she had known for just 7 days. It was madness. Irresponsible. Completely unlike the careful, practical existence she had built for herself. And yet, as the night deepened around her, Viola found herself imagining what such a life might be like: days spent working alongside Dawson, evenings filled with conversation and laughter, a home that was truly hers, perhaps even children someday. The vision was so vivid, so enticing that it frightened her with its power. Sleep eluded her that night as she wrestled with the biggest decision of her life. The next morning, Viola rose early, having barely slept. She dressed with care, choosing her best dress, a deep green calico that brought out the golden flecks in her hazel eyes. If today was to be a day of decisions, she wanted to face it looking her best. She had just finished pinning her hair when a knock sounded at her door. Expecting Dawson, she hurried to answer it, her heart beating faster at the thought of seeing him. But it was Mrs. Abernathy who stood on her porch, her thin face set in grim lines. "Miss Kingston," she said without preamble, "the school board has called an emergency meeting this morning. Your presence is required at 9 o'clock sharp." Viola's stomach tightened. "Regarding what matter, Mrs. Abernathy? I think you know very well," the older woman replied coldly. "Your conduct with that cowboy has become a matter of public concern. As a teacher entrusted with the moral education of our children, you are held to certain standards." Anger flared in Viola's chest. "My conduct has been entirely proper. Mr. Hawkins has been a perfect gentleman. Perfect gentlemen do not propose to women they've known for a week, Mrs. Abernathy snapped. "Oh yes, we all know about his outrageous proposal. The hotel waiter overheard everything. Of course he had. Nothing remained private in Shoshone City for long. What Mr. Hawkins and I discuss is no one's business but our own," Viola said firmly. "It becomes the school board's business when it affects the moral standing of our teacher," Mrs. Abernathy insisted. "9 o'clock, Miss Kingston. Do not be late." After she left, Viola stood in the doorway, trembling with anger and something else, a growing sense of clarity. For years, she had allowed the town's judgment to define the boundaries of her life, even as she pretended to ignore it. She had stayed in Shoshone City not because she loved teaching, but because she had accepted the limited vision others had for her future. Dawson had seen through that. He had looked at her and seen not what she was, but what she could be, what she wanted to be, if only she had the courage to reach for it. At 8:30, Viola left her house and walked not toward the town hall where the school board would be gathering, but toward the cattle camp outside town. She didn't know exactly what she would say to Dawson, only that she needed to see him before making any decisions. The camp was busy with activity when she arrived. Men were packing up supplies, loading wagons, and preparing for departure. Her heart sank. They were leaving today, not in a few days as she had thought. "Miss Kingston," Jake, Dawson's foreman, spotted her first. "Boss is down by the creek, madam, checking the last of the herd." Viola thanked him and made her way toward the creek, where she could see Dawson on horseback, directing a few cowboys as they guided reluctant cattle into the main group. He hadn't seen her yet, and for a moment, she simply watched him, confident in the saddle, respected by his men, at home in this world of open skies and hard work. When he finally turned and saw her, his whole face lit up with a smile that made her breath catch. He rode toward her quickly, dismounting before Dante had fully stopped. "Viola," he said, his voice warm with pleasure, "I didn't expect you so early." "You're leaving," she said, unable to keep the accusation from her tone. His smile faded, "Not by choice. We received word that a storm is coming. We need to get the herd moving if we're going to reach Fort Laramie before it hits." "When were you going to tell me?" "I was coming to town as soon as we finished here," he assured her. "I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye, Viola." Not after he stopped, taking in her expression more carefully. "What's happened?" Viola told him about Mrs. Abernathy's visit and the school board meeting. "They're going to dismiss me," she concluded, "or at least try to." "Because of me," Dawson said grimly. "No," Viola corrected him. "Because of their own narrow-mindedness. They've been looking for an excuse for years." Dawson took her hands, his eyes searching hers. Come with me, he said urgently. Today, now, don't give them the satisfaction of judging you one more time. To Fort Laramie. She asked, echoing their conversation from the night before. To start, he said, and then home to my ranch, as my wife if you'll have me. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and fear and hope. Viola thought of the school board waiting for her, of the years she had spent trying to please people who would never be satisfied, of the life she had accepted instead of the one she had dreamed of. Yes, she whispered, and then louder with more conviction. Yes, I'll go with you. Dawson's face transformed with joy. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle as she laughed, dizzy with the enormity of her decision. We'll need to get your things from town, he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her waist. There's nothing there I need, Viola realized. Just clothes and books, nothing that can't be replaced. Are you sure? Once we start the herd moving, we can't turn back. Viola thought of her small house with its familiar furniture, the schoolhouse where she had spent 8 years of her life, the town that had never truly accepted her. None of it seemed important anymore. I'm sure, she said firmly. But Dawson, there's something we need to do before we leave. Something important. An hour later, Viola stood beside Dawson in Reverend Thomas's small study, speaking vows that would bind them together as husband and wife. The ceremony was hastily arranged, but no less meaningful for its simplicity. Jake stood as witness, his weathered face split by a wide grin. Do you, Dawson Hawkins, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Reverend Thomas asked. I do, Dawson replied, his eyes never leaving Viola's face. And do you, Viola Kingston, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. The rings. Reverend Thomas prompted. Dawson looked momentarily stricken. I didn't have time to, but then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver band. It was my mother's, he explained. I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person to give it to. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Viola felt tears well in her eyes. It's perfect, she whispered. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thomas declared. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Hawkins. Dawson didn't need to be told twice. He gathered Viola in his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart swell, heedless of their small audience. Mrs. Hawkins, he murmured against her lips. Mrs. Hawkins, she repeated, testing the sound of her new name and finding it suited her perfectly. As they left the Reverend's house, hand in hand, they nearly collided with Mrs. Abernathy, who was hurrying down the street toward the town hall. She stopped short, her mouth falling open at the sight of them together. Miss Kingston, the school board is waiting, it's Mrs. Hawkins now, Viola corrected her gently. And you'll need to find a new teacher, Mrs. Abernathy. I've decided to leave Shoshone City. The older woman's face registered shock, then outrage. You can't be serious. You've married this cowboy after knowing him for a week. Sometimes a week is all it takes to recognize what truly matters, Dawson said, his arm protective around Viola's shoulders. Mrs. Abernathy sputtered incoherently for a moment before managing to say, No one will believe this. They said no one would ever marry her. Then they were wrong, Dawson replied simply. Good day, Mrs. Abernathy. As they walked away, Viola felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, years of judgment and limitation falling away with each step. She had no illusions that life with Dawson would be easy. There would be hardships and adjustments, storms both literal and figurative to weather together. But for the first time in her adult life, she was walking toward a future of her own choosing, with a man who saw her clearly and loved her exactly as she was. By noon, the cattle drive was underway, with Viola riding beside Dawson at the head of the herd. She had changed into a split riding skirt borrowed from one of the cook's supplies, her hair braided down her back, her new ring catching the sunlight as she guided her horse, a gentle mare Dawson had selected especially for her. Having second thoughts. Dawson asked as they crested a hill and Shoshone City disappeared from view behind them. Viola turned to her husband, and smiled. Not one. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, the silver band warm against his palm. Welcome to the adventure, Mrs. Hawkins. And as they rode forward together, Viola knew that she had finally found what she had been looking for all along, not just a husband, but a partner, a friend, and a future limited only by the vastness of the Wyoming sky. 5 years later, Viola stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Dawson taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. The little boy's laughter carried across the yard, his dark hair so like his father's ruffled by the spring breeze. Not too fast. She called, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. "He's doing fine," Dawson called back, pride evident in his voice as he led the pony in a careful circle. A natural horseman just like his mother. Viola smiled, remembering how terrified she'd been on that first cattle drive to Fort Laramie. She'd hidden her fear from Dawson, determined to prove herself equal to the challenge of ranch life. It hadn't taken long for him to see through her brave front, but instead of disappointment, he had shown her nothing but patience and encouragement. "You don't have to be perfect," he had told her during those early days on the ranch. "Just be yourself. That's who I fell in love with." And gradually, she had found her place in this new world, learning to manage the household, to ride for hours without getting saddle sore, to help with calving in the spring and preserving food for the winter. The life was hard but satisfying, filled with purpose and love in equal measure. Their son had arrived in the second year of their marriage, born during a late autumn snowstorm with only Dawson and the wife of one of their ranch hands to help bring him into the world. They had named him Thomas, after Viola's father, and from his first breath, he had been the light of their lives. Now, as she watched her family in the yard, Viola marveled at how different her life was from what she had once expected. The unmarriageable schoolteacher of Shoshone City had become a rancher's wife, a mother, and a woman respected in her own right among the scattered community of neighboring ranches. She had even fulfilled her dream of becoming a writer, in a way her articles on pioneer life, published under the name V.K. Hawkins, had begun appearing in Eastern newspapers, bringing a small but steady income and the satisfaction of sharing her perspective with a wider world. "Mama, watch me." Thomas called, sitting up straight in the saddle as Dawson let him hold the reins himself for the first time. "I see you, sweetheart," Viola called back. "You're doing wonderfully." As evening approached, Dawson lifted Thomas from the pony and sent him running toward the house. "Go help your mother with supper, Cowboy. I'll take care of Lightning." The boy raced up the steps, flinging himself into Viola's arms with the boundless energy of childhood. "Did you see me, Mama? I rode all by myself." "I did see," she assured him, smoothing his hair. "You were very brave. Now, let's get those hands washed for supper." Later, with Thomas tucked into bed and the house quiet save for the crackling of the fire, Viola and Dawson sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him, comfortable in the silence they had learned to share. "I got a letter from Timothy today," Viola said eventually. "He and Sarah are coming to visit next month with the children." "That's wonderful news," Dawson replied, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "It's been too long since you've seen your brother." "Almost 3 years," Viola agreed. "Their youngest was just a baby then. Now they have 3, with another on the way. We're racing them, it seems." Dawson's hand moved to rest on her belly, where their second child stirred as if responding to his touch. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted, "but happy, so very happy." They sat in silence for another moment before Dawson spoke again. "Do you ever regret it?" "Leaving Shoshone City the way we did?" Viola considered the question seriously. "Not the leaving," she said finally, "but sometimes I regret not staying for that school board meeting, just to see their faces when I told them I was resigning to marry the handsomest rancher in the territory." Dawson laughed, the sound deep and familiar. "I'm sorry I denied you that pleasure, Mrs. Hawkins. You've given me so many others in return," she said softly, turning to face him. Even after 5 years, the sight of his smile still made her heart beat faster. He leaned down to kiss her, his lips gentle against hers. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" he asked. "When we finally reached Fort Laramie," Viola smiled at the memory. I said I was afraid I would wake up and discover it had all been a dream. And now. She took his hand and placed it once more on her rounded belly, where new life grew strong and sure. Now I know that some dreams come true if you're brave enough to reach for them. Dawson's arms tightened around her, pulling her close as the Wyoming night deepened around them, stars burning bright in the endless sky. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a wild and joyful sound that echoed across the land they both loved. They said no one would ever marry you, Dawson murmured into her hair. And you didn't even ask before slipping on the ring, Viola reminded him with a smile. Best impulsive decision I ever made, he declared. As they sat together on the porch of the home they had built with love and hard work, Viola Kingston Hawkins, once the unmarriageable schoolteacher of Shoshone City, knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Not in the narrow confines of other people's expectations, but in the wide open spaces of a life chosen for herself, with a man who had seen her value from the first moment they met, and who continued to see it every day. A man who had slipped a ring on her finger and, in doing so, had given her not just his name, but a future brighter than any she could have imagined for herself. Under the vast Wyoming sky, surrounded by the life they had created together, Viola and Dawson Hawkins held each other close, their love a testament to the truth they had both discovered: that the opinions of others matter far less than the courage to follow your heart.